excited to have you all here today, and we are going to get started. So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Rob. I am the Director of Events and Marketing at Power to Fly. Super excited to present this workshop, AI EQ, how to implement AI without alienating your workforce, with Kelly Blackmon, founder of BE Consulting. You'll hear so much more from Kelly as we get going. But without further ado, let me just tell you a little bit about our code of conduct. This looks like a very scary wall of legalese, but basically what it means is just don't be a jerk. So if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me a DM. We do encourage you, if you'd like to turn on your camera. If you are not Instagram perfect, that is no problem. If you're eating a sandwich and want to keep your camera off, that's okay too. But love to see your face if you would like. We will have your microphones off for the entirety of the event. But we would encourage you to write in the chat and let us know if you have any questions or comments, or share your LinkedIn info. We want this to be also an opportunity that we can all use this to network with each other as well. We will be recording this conversation, so the good thing is you don't have to take notes. We will send you this recording in a couple of days, or perhaps you're watching the recording right now, in which case you know this already. But yeah, super excited there as well. And if you don't know about Power to Fly, I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are. Well, we help organizations attract top talent and retain engaged employees with solutions that simplify recruitment, enhance employee satisfaction, and drive long-term business success. We are 100% women-led company backed by Morgan Stanley, with over 200 million professionals in our network. If you want to learn more about us, just respond to any of those reminder emails. We are happy to chat with you. But without further ado, I want to introduce today's featured speaker, Kelly Blackmon, founder of BE Consulting. Kelly is an organizational strategist, and his work focuses on culture architecture, AI integration, and leadership decision making under acceleration. Through frameworks like AI EQ, which you're going to be hearing about in a moment, and Culture EQ, he helps organizations assess stability, clarify risk exposure, and implement transformation without eroding trust or performance. Kelly has advised leaders across HR, talent, and executive functions on aligning innovation with workplace integrity. So, Kelly, welcome back to the Power to Fly stage.
Hello, hello all. Greetings, everyone. And Rob, you and Power to Fly, thank you so much for having me.
Uh,
Um, I'd like to start off with a little bit of level setting and a little bit about me, just so we're all on the same page. First, the way that this is born, like the AI EQ and all of this good stuff, it's born out of this my own transformational journey, learning to become more emotionally intelligent myself. What I found is that in organizations, this is very, very lacking. So it was a combination of going to a million of these. AI implementation things where people are like, "Oh, we're gonna show you how to do this AI well, and we're gonna have better implementation and that sort of thing." And what I found was that there's a huge missing component. It was very much the human part. So for everyone, I'm certified in change management. I'm certified as a emotional intelligence practitioner. This is kind of like the combination of those two worlds. So that is a little bit of my backstory. I want to level set though, because some people they come to this and they think, oh well, it's going to be a situation where he's going to tell us how to solve our AI issues. Probably not. You're probably going to leave with more questions than answers, and that is intentional. And if I'm doing my job properly, that's going to be a great thing, and that's going to help you out a lot. In a sense, is very much teach a person to fish versus giving them a fish. So with that as our kind of background, let me share my me go ahead and share my presentation because everyone loves a good PowerPoint, right? All right. And just a second here, start up my slideshow. So, to start, let me just say this. The the reality is that a lot of times we'll hear AI fails depending on the study you're looking at a clip of about 70 to 80%, which is true, but really misleading, honestly, um, the way it's framed. What typically happens is that AI, it fails in the long run, but usually as far as the implementation goes, really easy stuff like AI works really, really well at what it's good at. So what it really does is it breaks down not in the initial implementation, it typically breaks down over time and how a firm or how an organization actually absorbs the AI. So it's usually not in the rollout, it's usually not in the tool, but it's usually going to be in the fact that it absorbs the way it absorbs the collective, the way it absorbs how the culture changes over time. Here's what ends up happening. Um, Everyone gets that, and we've probably all heard the case that AI is it multiplies whatever is in your organization, and that's really, really true. So it speeds things up. It speeds up things like um, your technology, your outputs, things like that. And most conversations, they really do focus on, excuse me, they focus on the technology portion, and we really won't do much of that here because the system around it is where we see the biggest failure points. Like that's the gap. That's usually where things start to break up. And what we tend to see is that we'll see faster decisions, we'll see faster inputs, I'm sorry, faster outputs, but the interpretation, the alignment, the responses that we get from people, those don't move nearly at the same speed. And it's really because of the fact that our organizations aren't typically set up to take that much change on. You can imagine we think about things like culture fit when we're hiring new people. We want someone who comes in and who can help the organization to grow or stay on a trajectory. Adopting AI is like having a whole new workforce come in. So it is really disruptive, and that's a place where we have to start. So most AI initiatives, they succeed very much in the pilot, in the beginning. And what happens is that the instability that comes, it is really, really a case that what is building underneath is the stuff that we don't see. We really don't see those for months. Uh, there's an instability that comes with some of the things we probably have heard of in psychological safety and intention. There's a huge gap when it comes to how those things are treated. So the speed of AI really kind of it seduces us because it makes us think that we're winning when what's really happening in a large way is that we're building a house on a very shaky foundation. So our immediate measurements, are people using it? Yes. Our immediate measurements, are we seeing productivity jump? Yes. The output is increasing. Yes, but the problem is that that's not sustainable, and that's when we start seeing all of the numbers, all the bad parts of the numbers we see for AI implementation. Because what we also are increasing is instability, and that shows up later, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line. That's when the data says that we're actually starting to see that instability creep in. So in the real world, I want to show you what it looks like in the real world. Last year, I went to the SHRM conference and I gave a similar presentation at the SHRM conference in San Diego. After my session, I get approached by a C-suite leader. His name is John. John, very nice guy, seems like a very smart guy. He told me that his organization spent about 2 years researching what the best ways were to implement AI. and basically to do it in a way that causes the least disruption possible, a way that people would implement, people would use it, that sort of thing. He said they spent another year basically vetting different vendors, different types of AI technology. And then they spent almost another year basically just creating all the workflows and the communication that they'd have with the team. He said that one of the things that they wanted to do that they found in their research is that people were afraid of being replaced. So he made sure that they told the teams no one's going to get replaced. No one's going to get fired. There's not going to be any sort of negative result from us bringing in this AI. I don't know how they can guarantee that, but he said that that's what they did. Um, he said the communication was very clear. He said that the leadership was fully aligned. Now, what happens in this situation? John is telling me this because what he said was that they spent $937,000 on their AI implementation and people were running from it. He said that less than 20% of their staff was actually willing to use the AI. Now, if you think about it, that's not confusion. That's not hesitation. If it were confusion, then we could train our way out of it. We can use training to fix it. If it were something as simple as hesitation, we could be really clear in our communications to say, "Oh well, this is what's going to happen here, and this is why we're using it." Uh, none of those things worked, and that just lets us know that it's not confusion, it's not hesitation, it was avoidance, and that's a very different problem to solve. And honestly, something else to understand entirely over the other two things. So, Rob, if you don't mind launching that poll, this to me is where it gets really interesting because this isn't just happening in John's organization. Now, John said that they are a tech firm, so people should be naturally inclined to use technology. But again, they weren't. John said that they're a Silicon Valley firm, so they should be naturally inclined to be willing to adopt technology. But the two biggest things that he thought that they were going to have a problem with weren't the things that move the needle. Right? Just looking at the responses coming in. Yep. And look, there are no wrong answers. Just take your time and we give it a few seconds. Let everyone get in. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that all of these are things that apparently you all have seen. All of these are things that show up in an organization. And I think that that part makes it really interesting because none of these are the root issue. All right. Thanks so much. That is good information. Now, typically, when we talk about um, the failure for AI implementation to be successful, we see these five things. We see low adoption, team resistance, fragmented decisions, invisible friction, and misaligned priorities. Now, those are probably the five most cited, highly cited failure points when it comes to AI implementation. And typically, the way we think of this is uh, these are the five problems that we have to solve. Usually, if we're working in HR or L&D or IT or anything on the operation side, these become like our babies to try to nurse and fix and to bring through to something better. But these are actually not. the behaviors, like the behaviors themselves exist, but these aren't the things that we actually have to solve for. Initially, these are probably symptoms of something bigger. So these five different expressions are pretty much a part of the same pattern. And really what that means is that we're trying to solve the wrong problem. Um, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but this always pops in my mind when I think about the way we're looking at things, the way we're trying to solve things, and what eventually ends up happening. In the movie, Indiana Jones finds out that all these other folks are searching for the Ark of the Covenant in the wrong place. And in a sense, that's what we're doing when we're trying to work our way through. Um, AI trying to solve for adoption or things like that. Because when we see low adoption of these things, we're thinking, well, we have to drive adoption. When we see resistance, what we're thinking is, oh, well, we have to reinforce or drive, push through so that people will stop resisting. When we see things like the misalignment, we're trying to realign our teams. We think that we train enough, or we give enough incentives, or in some cases, if we give enough punishment, then what's going to happen is people are going to say, "Oh, I get it now." In fact, I remember there was one really big consulting firm based here in Chicago, and their CEO said, like, he's in their town hall, and he says, "Hey, the people who aren't using AI, we see you." Not really sure how he thought that was going to impact people, but the implementation, the adoption did not go up after that. So those things aren't the real problem. What is the case is that we're responding to, and this is what I hope you all will take from this. We're reacting to the symptoms while we're also not addressing the actual problems, which is the actual system itself. So the problem here is not what we're seeing, because we can see those behaviors and we know that those things happen: low adoption or misalignment or people trying to use it in a different way or not use it at all. Those things we can see, so they do exist. But the real problem is how we're interpreting those as signals, because usually we're trying to attack them face on, and it's akin to trying to treat symptoms and not the disease. So that's essentially what we're seeing. So that being said, when we think that we're going to train our way out of people not behaving the way we want, that's not really a realistic thing. So that is what got me to AI EQ. It's something I've implemented in multiple places at this point, and it's really about one thing. It's really to create stability in the face of AI. So this means not just the actual tool, not just the rollout, but stability in the system beneath it. So it's not performance, it's not the adoption. It's really specifically about stability. And that's what this whole tool is created to do. So it's about what's happening in your system right now. When that pressure increases, when everything speeds up faster than it can be stabilized, and the places where it actually starts to break, that's what this is made to fix. And if I'm being honest, most of the leadership that I talk to, they are very, very smart people, but they don't realize the game that they're actually playing until the damage is done. And that's where we start to see those numbers creep up, that 70 and 80% of AI implementation failures. That's when that 6 to 12 to 18 months starts to creep in, because at this point, people are past the phase of we don't understand, we understand what we're doing, and they've moved into a place of now I got to protect myself or things of that sort. Excuse me. So the behaviors that we talked about here, they really aren't the problem. They're as I mentioned, they're the signal of the problem, and those aren't the specific failure points that we have to react to. I have three specific points that I would call the signals, where we can actually start to read and understand exactly where our teams are, where our organizations are, a lot of times where our leadership is. So obviously, the first uh, misaligned priorities. The second, invisible resistance. And the third is going to be the fragmented decisions. Those are the signals that we have to, one, learn to view, and then two, learn to interpret so that we can see what's actually happening. And the good part is, once we do this, we'll have actual data around what's happening. And at that point, we can design excuse me, we can design tools, we can design projects, we can design around fixing those specific things, and the impact is probably close to a 180. You'll start to see real reasoning for why people aren't adopting, and you'll start having real tools about how to fix it. So let's talk about each of these just a little bit. The misaligned priorities, that's usually the first signal you're going to see. Um, it's essentially the way I would describe it is everyone thinks that they're working toward the same thing, but they're not. They're not. Leadership is gonna measure success in a particular way. The managers are going to interpret it in a whole other way, and then the teams themselves are probably executing this in a third way. The um the best example I can give is I was working with a fintech corporation at one point. um, the leadership said our pulse surveys are showing, no, I'm sorry, our reviews are showing that the customers are not happy with our service. So we want to spend more time with the customers. We want to we want to have our team to stay on the line and answer more questions. And keep in mind, this is a sales team. um, the managers, on the other hand, the managers are the in between, and they're told, "Hey, have your folks stay on the line with them, having them to help to be more customer friendly." The reality though is that the managers are incentivized to get people off the phone because their bonuses are connected to sales. So in reality, the managers are saying, yes, we have to do this because this is what you told us, but sort of a little bit, they're kind of against this because it's gonna cost them. The day-to-day frontline employee, they don't know the CEO. They don't care about the challenge there. They want to stay in the good graces of their managers. So what happened? The numbers continued to drop as far as customer service went, and nothing really moved the needle on really what was a misaligned priority. Everyone's kind of thinking about what's most important to them. That's usually where we see the misalignment happen. And the problem is that it looks the same as a successful alignment would be. People are working hard. People are, they're sitting at their desk and they're trying. The effort is there. The problem is that it's not compounding. It's not creating the change that you want it to create. Now, the really big issue here is that AI is kind of its own monster. And again, it multiplies whatever is there. So if it's the case that you have a lot of people with misaligned priorities, what you're going to see is that it's going to get worse because AI forces the speed to increase, but it doesn't do anything with the alignment. So over time, the system starts to drift. Excuse me. But the people, they're not failing. They're doing their jobs, but they're optimizing for different priorities. And again, that's not a behavior problem. That's not something we can change behaviors on. uh, that's really a priority problem. And here's the thing: when that starts to show itself, when that actually starts to, when the priorities don't line up with the overall mission, we'll start to see the second part of this, which is invisible resistance. So this is our second signal. It's probably where most leadership is going to get it wrong because again, they're measuring these other success metrics. Are butts and seats? Are people adopting? Are they using? Blah blah blah. But what will happen is over time, we'll start to see what starts to look like resistance. And look, it isn't really resistance. Um, People think that it's people pushing back, but really is more like people pulling away. So they're in the meetings and they're nodding and they're being trained and they're going to the trainings, but they're not actually changing how they work. And what really comes across after a certain point is that this isn't really resistance. It's really more like they're recalibrating. They got hit with this new thing, and now there's this sort of period where they have to go, ooh, is this okay? Is this safe? Am I about to be obsolete? Does this still work? Um, and again, AI being AI, it accelerates this. So there's not a whole lot of time, excuse me, there's not a whole lot of time for employees to change or to build a sense of psychological safety around this. So even though it's the case that you may be told, yeah, we're not going to let anyone go due to this AI implementation, the reality is that there has to be time and decisions and things to back that up. So that's where we end up having this sort of invisible resistance because the expectations, they really start to change faster than the people can make sense of them. And what happens? Well, they stop engaging, they start to hesitate, they wait. Sometimes they quietly opt out. A lot of folks will find workarounds and ways to not use AI. And keep in mind, again, that's not a behavioral problem. That's a trust and clarity problem, which is a whole other animal and a whole different thing to fix. So when people start to pull back and you start to have this sort of invisible resistance, it leads to our third part, our third signal that we see, and it's fragmented decisions. Now, the third signal is usually at that usually 6 to 18 months, usually around that 18-month mark. This is where everything starts to become visible. This is when you start to see that the priorities don't align, and you start to see people really pulling back and you start to see that the decisions stop lining up. So you'll have two teams, exact same tool, same stated goal, but they'll have completely different outputs. Those standards will start to drift, the approaches start to vary, and then you'll start to see that the quality gets to be really, really inconsistent. So the work is still happening, right? The work is happening, people are still doing it, but it's no longer connected to what the overall goal was. And if I got to say it again, I will. AI accelerates this. AI is the reason why that happens on such a huge scale. And it's because it allows people to move faster, but it doesn't force them to move together. It doesn't force them to work together. Now, I'll add one extra piece to this that I don't know if anyone ever thinks about, but the world we live in, and specifically the Western world, we have. We've had a lot of changes. So, specifically, COVID is a big one, but also in the last 20 years or so, we've had a lot of the places where we have learned to get our belonging and we learn to be relational with other human beings. Those places don't exist to the same degree, and definitely not to uh, they don't have the same strength. So back, when I was a kid, if you wanted to, if I was taught by religious organizations, so church, synagogue, wherever you wanted to go. That was a place where people gathered. That was a place where people learned to be human beings. That was a place where we all kind of learned to deal with each other, deal with people you don't like, that sort of thing. Um, it was also the case that we had multi-generational family. So in a lot of ways, your grand or your great grandmother would tell you, nope, that's not acceptable, blah, blah, blah. This is where we learned belonging. This is where we learned, again, how to human relational knowledge came from these places. And third, community. So in a lot of cases, I just saw something recently where it mentioned that about 46% of people say they don't know their neighbors at all. And only about 25% of people said they only sort of knew their neighbors. So community is also a big missing piece. This is happening worldwide, but specifically in the Western world and in the US, we're seeing this a lot more. What's the problem ends up being that while those places that were teaching us to be human beings or teaching us how to relate, teaching us how to get along and that sort of thing, while those things are starting to disappear, the need has not. And because that's the case, when people come into the workplace, there is this extra sense of responsibility put on the workplace that now means that the workplace has to hold a lot of things that it wasn't really meant to hold. And when you add that on top of AI accelerating what the workplace is, what the workplace looks like, you're gonna see, and you all have probably seen this already, where AI becomes like a dividing rod. The AI becomes an issue about identity and about belonging and about relevance and about if I have the right to be here anymore. I saw one of the questions someone submitted was about, do I need to change fields now? Because AI is being implemented. All of this being said, it leads to a place where in the workplace, what we're starting to see is that we don't AI doesn't allow us to have a single system. AI creates multiple systems and multiple versions, and that could be just on one team, just depending on how it's framed and what we're doing. So again, this isn't a decision problem. This is a coherence problem. And the reality is that when all three of these things start to show up, we start to see the misaligned priorities, we start to see the invisible resistance, and we start to see those fragmented decisions. That's where AI starts to fail. And again, that's not an adoption problem. Uh, that's really a signal problem. So John's company, they spent 2 or 3 years. They're researching the best ways to implement AI. The whole goal was to make sure that they didn't disengage their workforce. They knew the risk that people tend to do X when Y happens. The reality is they spent another year looking for the exact right tool, the exact right vendor. Excuse me. They spent more time creating their communications team created a beautiful set of messaging to make sure that they could alleviate all of those fears and all those concerns. And 3 years and $937,000 later, they found out that they misread those signals. The reality is that this is what John and I came to in like a 5 minute conversation after we realized that this is what happened. So just let that sink in for a second. That's 3 years and almost $1 million of investment. That's that's costly. So the simple thing is that we want to try to figure out a way to to read and understand the signal. Um, I hope that you all understand at this point that fixing the behavior isn't really the goal. Like you're going to go to a million of these things. They're going to tell you that the goal is to fix this behavior, or you can implement that thing or do this training, and that's going to change the behavior. But behaviors are rooted in what these signals are showing us. And until you understand that, that's gonna continue to be a problem. So with the idea of us saying, how do we implement our AI without disengaging people, without scaring folks away, without having these things sprawl out into the negatives? It really is about learning to read these signals. So how do you get to ensure that you understand exactly what's happening? Not just the stuff that's visible, not just the stuff on our post surveys, but actually what's underneath it. That's the question. That actually brings us to our last slide. And fortunately, we were able to wrap up a little bit early so we can get some questions in. If you're seeing anything like this, if you're trying to make sense of it, this is where you start. I have uh, I'm going to call it a diagnostic. It's just a few questions, but it's going to help you to understand how to view those same three signals that we were talking about in your own organization. No sales pitch attached to it or anything. It should help you to now start asking better questions though. And just this little simple diagnostic should help you to start reading the signals in your organization a little bit more clearly. Once you're doing that in your own environment, what's going to happen is that you'll have a lot more insight. And if you've ever heard the term, bad data gives you bad actions, this is very much what we're trying to avoid. This should allow you to have some good data. And from this, you should be able to start to move your organization in a direction of, let's put the things in place. Let's put the actual things in place we need so that our AI adoption implementation is actually successful. That, my friends, is my presentation. I'll save time now, maybe the next 5 or 10 minutes for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was great. Yeah, if you have any questions for Kelly, pop them in the chat so we can get to them in the next 10 minutes. But I'll kick us off with a question that we had pre-submitted, which obviously you went over a lot of the, quote unquote mistakes that are happening right now with
Sure.
leadership. But if you had to just pinpoint a single biggest mistake when it comes to communicating AI initiatives across an organization, what would that biggest single mistake be that companies are making right now?
So specific to communication, I think it's
Mhm.
it's it's probably going to be not knowing where your team actually is. We do a lot of assuming, and this isn't just with AI. This is in general. A lot of times we put the cart before the horse, and we decide that we need a new thing. The board says we need to implement AI, so we start looking for tools that fit what we need, but we don't necessarily consider the human element of this is how this is gonna impact, or this is where our group is. Our group doesn't currently trust leadership, so there's a huge gap we need to fill before we start moving into implementation, that sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one other thing that you brought up that made me think there is you were talking about these places that we now sometimes lack in this sense
Yeah.
of community. And that was making me think a lot of companies right now have either a hybrid office often.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of our
Mm-hmm.
dominant offices that we're seeing now.
Yep.
So I'm curious, what are the some of the challenges, or how can people overcome those challenges when you have got people in the office? They can learn
Sure.
AI in a very
Sure.
different way sometimes than people that are working remotely, working asynchronously in that way.
So, boy, I hate to be repetitive, but I got to tell you, it's really about knowing what these people are experiencing.
Hmm.
So, pulse surveys are a great way, but sometimes a pulse survey doesn't give us. We may not know exactly what to ask in a pulse survey. So, one of the things that I like to recommend is not only doing a pulse survey, but also bringing this stuff up in team meetings. Team meetings are beautiful because you get to see the power dynamics. You get to see who's being really quiet versus who's really talkative. You get to see who's kind of muting and who's up front with information. That really tells you a lot about what your culture is and what's happening. The other way is really working with leadership because uh, good or for better or worse, leadership is the source of truth in our organizations. At least they what they do is a source of truth. So as much as we may want to communicate, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. And John's organization, they communicated it beautifully. What they found out was that the leadership was saying something different by their actions. So that's another kind of gap that you really have to bridge before you can implement anything with any success.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think those kind of post surveys, I mean, whether you're talking about AI, whether you're talking about
Yeah.
inclusion, whether you're talking about return to work, whatever the
Hmm.
topic might be, I mean, that is such a key to
Yeah.
have. Or if you're in a one-on-one with team members, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and having multiple options, having the option for people to come to you and say, Rob, this is what I think, but for the people who don't have, you know,
Yep.
that's a little intimidating for them, have the option where they can do that anonymously as well.
Yes. Very good point. Very good point. One of the things that I found in a lot of the poll surveys, if we once we did like triangulated surveying where we would go to team meetings and have one-on-ones and that sort of thing, what we found is that a lot of the times the poll surveys were inaccurate, mainly because people didn't trust that they were
Mhm.
anonymous.
Yeah.
You know, other times we found that people felt burned out. They felt like whatever they mentioned, there had been no action over years of these poll surveys. So people felt very much like I'm checked out. Like those two things alone, I think, can greatly alter what the poll survey data says versus what's really happening.
Yes, for any leaders listening or watching, you have to actually read the survey afterwards and use, because yes, I totally see that. A lot of people are
Yeah,
like, why am I taking this survey? Nothing ever happens.
yeah,
So I
yep,
think that is a really good point. And just another question for you before we wrap up. A lot of people were talking about, obviously the fears that can come from AI. And
yeah.
as you mentioned, that can be obviously a hurdle to the adoption. Do you do you think there's any rationale to come to people who are maybe more experienced. Someone wrote in, I have days of decades of experience.
Yeah,
Do I see that actually as a liability because people are looking to hire younger
sure.
folks that might have, been born basically with using AI?
Yep.
What do you say to those people who have that experience and now are worried?
Sure. Without painting with a wide brush, I think that there's credence to both sides of that. Some people are thinking, I want to have someone who understands systems, and that may be a deeper need than understanding the specific technology. For me, I'm always gonna hedge toward learning the technology, because if you've been there for 2 decades but you're not willing to learn, not willing to grow, not willing to change, not willing to make sense of how this new technology fits into your role, then you become more of a liability than if you're on the forefront, if you're open, if you're curious, if you're trying to understand. Then the fact that you have 2 decades is an ad versus a net loss.
Yeah, and what I would say is, a lot of experienced professionals, you have those storytelling skills, those
Hmm.
people skills that,
Hmm.
again, maybe to paint with a wide brush, as you
Sure.
said, Kelly, like that some maybe younger people don't have. They don't have that
Yeah.
experience maybe because they've started working remotely. They don't have those kind of interpersonal skills.
Sure.
And a lot of those kind of storytelling skills are so key to how we are using AI.
Very
So I
true.
think definitely kind of leading with those, and ultimately what we want to build are these intergenerational offices as
That's
well,
right.
so we can all learn from each other. And I love what Stephanie was saying in the chat, not to our previous point, not just read the survey, but share survey trends and action
Oh,
plans with how you're addressing and opportunities for improvement with employees.
yeah. That now I'll be honest with you. That's almost always a very touchy subject. And the really funny part about this is that the idea behind the poll survey is to understand where people are. When people say things like, "Are you going to share the poll survey information?" and leadership doesn't, what you're essentially saying is, "We don't trust you. We don't trust you to have this information, or we don't trust what you're going to think about us or what you're going to do with this." And the reality is that if someone doesn't trust you, your very, very natural inclination is to not trust them. So it is really important that, I mean, obviously if there's some stuff in there that employees don't need to see, but the trends, to understand where you're at, sharing that is so powerful, especially when it comes to trying to build that trust or trying to break down those walls of resistance. It's the case that if you don't do that, or especially if people have asked for it, boy, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're really causing more walls to go up.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And as you said, like if there's certain things in the
Yeah.
nitty-gritty that you don't want to share, that's completely fine. But what I think is important is to share the trends, as you
Yep.
mentioned, or
Yep.
kind of these action steps, as Stephanie said. So this was so great, Kelly. I think
Yes.
everyone, hopefully got a lot out of this. And if you're watching the recording, so much to rewatch and go back through this presentation. But before I let you and our audience go, where else can people hear about you, connect with you, learn more, and all that good stuff?
Well, I'm plugging in right now the my information to the chat. So there's that QR code if you want to use that quick guide. This is also my email, and obviously you can reach me on LinkedIn. And that's my LinkedIn profile right there. Feel free to visit the site, thebeconsulting.com, and or email, either one. I'm usually pretty available on those in those ways, and my hope is that everyone will at least take some step to try to better acquaint themselves with what's really happening behind the AI implementation failures.
Amazing. And I'm also, if you're, for everyone listening live, I'll also share that QR code in our recording email once you
Awesome.
get that later this week. And thank you so much, Kelly. This was great. And
Yes,
thank
yes.
you, everyone else, for spending this 45 minutes with us. And as we always like to say, this you could have done a lot of things in this 45 minutes. So
That's
I
right.
think it's great that you are taking this time to educate yourselves, advance your career, further your own team's success at your company. So please give yourself a nice little treat today for making sure that you took this time out of your day, or to whether attending live or watching this recording. So thank you all so much. We will see you at the next Power to Fly event, which we're hosting all the time. And